Good evening to you both, and let's begin with reaction to Tuesday's throne speech and the messaging it conveyed.
That Canadian sovereignty is not to be disrespected, that any relationship we have going forward on trade, the economy, defense, all has to be grounded in respect for the independence of Canada and our democracy.
At least two premiers were among those on hand, including past prime ministers from both sides of the aisle, on hand to hear the king deliver a speech from the throne that underscored sovereignty and reiterated Carney government promises to make life more affordable while investing in nation-building projects and diversifying trade. Alberta's premier wasn't there, but says in a statement, "It's nice to hear the Prime Minister wants to build projects of national significance and position Canada as an energy superpower, but there was sadly no mention in the throne speech of any substantive actions or policy repeals to address priorities that I have outlined to the Prime Minister on behalf of Albertans." Janet, how do you see this throne speech playing to the reset of relations between the Smith and Carney governments? How much of a door does it open?
Well, throne speeches don't usually contain a lot of substantive policy announcements. They're about setting the tone, and then the policy announcements will come. But I'm sympathetic with the Premier's impatience on this. We just had a federal election where 64% of Albertans voted for the Conservative Party. And you know, they most voted for the Conservative Party because they're not happy with the status quo with Ottawa. So the Premier's put forward her demands, and she's anxiously awaiting a grand gesture from Mark Carney. And I can say from my own polling, I think Albertans are waiting for some gesture coming from Mark Carney that it's going to be a different relationship between Canada and Ottawa. So I wasn't expecting to hear it in the throne speech. I was expecting the king to get into specific policies. But now that the throne speech is done, I think Albertans are going to lose patience very, very quickly if we don't hear something substantive from this federal government.
Barry, the throne speech did draw reference to Canada becoming the world's leading energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy, but no reference to what might be fast-tracked. How much of an omission is that? Should there have been something more specific, especially where our province is concerned?
Well, I don't think there can be. I think Carney's government is trying to take advantage of this kind of a bit of a national momentum on trying to move Canada beyond its relationship with the U.S., as fraught as it is with Trump in power. And I think he has to be guarded because he does have a number of other stakeholders to look after, including First Nations, other provinces, etc. So while I think he set the table well, I'm with Janet on the fact that there can't be a lot of details spilled out. And quite honestly, I don't think, unless it was anything except here are the keys to the new pipeline, I don't think you would have got a very glowing review from Premier Smith anyway. It's to her advantage to have a little bit of tension there. It serves her political purpose. But I think overall, I think the throne speech did set a good tone, but it was specific enough, I think, to put some real accountability to the Carney government in the short term. So we wait and see if he can deliver.
Janet, anything to be made of at least two premiers being on hand? We saw Wab Kinew, Susan Holt of New Brunswick as well, but not any of the others.
Well, you know, we've only had the monarch do the speech from the throne on 3 occasions, right? So this is very historic. And I think probably everybody looked at their calendar to try and figure out if they could be there, because it'd be something you talk about for a long time. And 2 premiers made it work. And I imagine the others paused and thought about it. I probably just think that it was a scheduling thing for most. You know, even Danielle Smith, she may have her differences with Mark Carney, but I think if you talk to her office, it's probably more of a scheduling thing than any sort of political statement. But you know, there were a lot of interesting faces in that audience, and it just shows you how historic it was that you know, at this time, a king that's suffering with his own health issues decided that he would make a 24-hour trip to Canada to read this speech in person.
Barry, on Janet's point of interesting faces in the audience, coverage of the throne speech included images of former PMs Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper seated side by side, at times casually chatting. What's to be made of that as a potential show of unity?
Well, I think it is. As we mentioned before, the momentum of kind of the national interest being served by everybody getting together and trying to push in the same direction. Certainly, with images like that certainly helps progress that. I could tell you that if I would have had an opportunity to see the King give the throne speech, I certainly would have jumped at it as well. But, I think Canadians right now are looking for those ideas of unity and common purpose to be defined. And I think it sends, if nothing more, at least a visual signal and a kind of an overall message that everyone's trying to go the same direction. And I think overall that's going to be good for the country going forward.
Janet, on the unity front, Canadian sovereignty may be a focal point, but there's this lingering issue of Alberta separation sentiments playing out in the background. You're out today with polling commissioned by CBC. What do those numbers say about the state of Albertans' views?
Well, we have a question that we've been asking for 5 years now. And the question is, we read a statement to people, we ask them if they agree or disagree. And the statement is, Alberta would be better off if it's separated. And in the 5 years we've been tracking that question, the numbers have been pretty consistent. And the current survey, we've got 30% of people agreeing that Alberta would be better off if it's separated. So, it's not a majority, but neither is it a small fringe either. 30% of people, this sentiment has been with us for a long time. But what's interesting in this poll is we see a big increase in the number of people who strongly agree with that sentiment. So my read of things is that it's not that we have like a growing number of separatists in the province, but people who adhere to a separatist sentiment, their voices are getting louder, they are getting more entrenched, and I think that's the story here. And on the opposite side of things, we saw that a big jump in the number of people who say they identify more with Canada than with Alberta. So the Federalists are sort of getting entrenched as well. And I'd say polarization is the theme on separation. Whatever side of the table you're on, you're holding your opinions more strongly.
Yeah, polarization indeed. Okay, now Barry, could or should Tuesday's throne speech have made an effort to address those Albertans harboring separation sentiments?
Well, I don't think words are going to do it anymore. I don't think the idea that we care, or that the Ottawa says we care about Alberta, the West, or the energy industry is enough. I think there has to be concrete action in order to, change the view that Janet's just espoused through her polling there, where there's a hardening of that position. So the words aren't going to help us. We need some action in order for that sentiment to dissipate significantly.
We heard from University of Calgary infectious diseases expert Dr. Craig Jenney off the top tonight on the continued surge in measles cases across Alberta, especially so in the southern region. Barry, given the rate of growth of cases surpassing the 600 mark over the past few days, surprise provincial officials have been largely absent in fronting Alberta's response. Very little since the start of the month when Minister Adriana LaGrange and the interim medical officer of health announced an awareness campaign.
No, well, I'm disappointed, but I'm not shocked. This government seems to want to put politics ahead of public health at this point. And it's interesting to note that, they trot out ministers to talk about banning books, removing books from bookshelf. And I don't know of any children, quite frankly, that have ever been physically harmed by getting their hands on some material they shouldn't, and yet you don't see the premier, the ministers talking about how important it is to get this under control. It's kind of a sad thing to see the politics presiding over public health when it comes to the measles right now.
Janet, on the politics side, the recent cabinet shuffle saw many of the health elements being split up among four portfolios, each with separate ministers. No longer Adriana LaGrange leading the way in the overhaul of the health system. Where do you think that leaves Albertans' expectations of the government in responding to situations like the continued surge in measles cases?
Well, so many of us wondered what this would do to sort of the voice of healthcare or control over healthcare when the premier did her cabinet shuffle, and she assigned so many different ministers to different aspects of health. So, this, what used to be one ministry is now covered by four different ministers. And so there is a confusion with chain of command. And then, as Barry said, you've got the politicalization of this issue. Vaccinations became very fraught during COVID. And so So the government wants to make them available, but in terms of sort of promoting and advocating for them, yeah, the government is pretty quiet on these things. And adding to the confusion is we have all of these different departments. Is this something? Is the fight for vaccinations? This is something that should be led by primary care practitioners, by hospitals. I don't think we're talking about too many older people getting them, but if measles gets in long-term care facilities, we've got a problem there. So, I think that's one of the points of confusion when you divide up the healthcare system is where does public health fall? Is it in hospitals or is it in primary care?
Some questions to be answered. Okay, for us, one more topic, and that is a top-up of funding for Grande Prairie's transition from the RCMP to a municipal police service.
It's not my understanding that any further money is going to be requested. Although we always say in policing, sometimes we have to assess and reassess certain situations.
Now, the government is spending an additional $7 million. That's on top of nearly $10 million announced at the outset. The new police chief says the city has hired 50 officers in the last 21 months, and the new money will help with recruitment, training, buying more police vehicles, and IT equipment. Now, Barry, as a former mayor, former head of Alberta municipalities, what's to be made of the government's contribution nearly doubling at this point of the transition? And should it be up to the province to dig a bit deeper to help see this through?
Well, it forwards their political agenda when it comes to policing. And again, this is the politicization of the process. I don't pretend to be an expert on what the best policing service is for Grande Prairie, but it would be nice to see the province have a bit of a consolidated view about how much they're going to invest in police services across the province for all the municipalities. This is a significant grade for Grande Prairie in terms of who's paying for the transition pieces and who's paying for policing in general. And I think it would be better for all of us, including all of the other municipalities, if the province would wrap their heads or hands around a policy that gave equal amount of policing or as equitable amount of policing as they could to every jurisdiction.
Janet, is there a message here to other municipalities that have maybe taken up the Smith government on the offer of funding to explore their own transition away from the Mounties? Not necessarily to make the move, but to look at it.
Well, clearly the government would like to move away from RCMP doing municipal policing. There's no secret about that. And they do not want this transition in Grande Prairie to fail, because if other municipalities are looking at the idea of moving away from the RCMP, if the Premier's ever going to have any success in establishing an Alberta provincial police force, she needs this transition to go well. So it's not surprising that they're investing in this, and if this is the direction they're going to go, they'll be looking for learnings. They'll be looking for this to be a success. They'll be looking to figure out how they can transition more municipalities either to their own police forces or to some sort of an Alberta provincial police force.
Barry, on Janet's point there, by committing more dollars to Grande Prairie's transition, how much of the message is there to be read into where the Smith government stands in its own efforts to ditch the RCMP provincially?
Well, again, it's been clear, regardless of what surveys have said or what Albertans have asked for, the province is bent on getting rid of the RCMP and having a provincial service. And that being said, as Janet said, making sure it doesn't fail by pumping in the money that's necessary, because any costs that are directly above and beyond are going to be borne by a local taxpayer. That's going to become politically untenable at the local level, and there'll be a lot of heads turned around who's to blame for that. So Janet's right. The province has a really big stake in making sure Grande Prairie does a good job in this transition. And then other communities are going to look and say, how can I be advantaged by that? And if they're going to be spoon-fed more dollars, you will see that happen. Municipalities are generally short cash for all kinds of reasons. And if somebody's willing to come in and subsidize police for them, you bet they'll look at that option.
And Janet, quickly, your polling was in the headlines not that long ago in relation to support for an Alberta pension plan. Did a support for a provincial police service factor into those numbers as well?
Yeah, and that stuff is available on my website if anybody wants to visit it. Yeah, there was questions in there on what I call a number of these firewall issues, things related to greater independence for Alberta. And yeah, and what we see is for all of these things, police, Alberta pension plans and stuff, we're not necessarily at a place where we have majority support for these things. But going back to our first topic about separation is, not all Albertans are separatists, but some are looking for more independence from Ottawa. And I don't think we're there yet on most of these issues in terms of them being like mainstream majority opinion. But look for these things to heat up if Albertans don't feel like they get that, tangible response from the Mark Carney government soon.
All right. We have to leave it there. We're out of time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.